So I think we all can agree that things aren't going well for the Bulls right now. They've lost 12 of their last 16 games. Yes, 12 of their last 16. And to make matters worse, it was recently announced that Zach Lavine has entered into the NBA health and safety protocol and will miss multiple games as a result. Now, what makes all of this even more unfortunate is that the Bulls traded away their first-round pick in exchange for Nikola Vucevic, which means despite the Bulls likely missing the playoffs with more losses, which usually is the one benefit in the NBA is that you can get a high draft pick with more losses, but unless that pick falls in the top 4 for the Bulls, it is going to go to the Orlando Magic. Now, I've seen so many comments in my last 2 videos how the Bulls should 100% absolutely tank the rest of the season, to even a few people who said the Bulls are already clearly tanking, that this is their plan all along. Well, let me discuss a few points on why, even where the Bulls currently are at in the standings, and even with the most recent news about Lavine, that the Bulls should absolutely not tank despite the circumstances that they find themselves in. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. So the concept of tanking isn't anything new in the NBA. It's the idea that if your team clearly is not going to be competing, let alone for a title, but even good enough to make it to the playoffs, you might as well tank this season. Do even more poorly to get a better shot at a higher draft pick. Well, the problem with that is, unlike the other major sports, the NBA operates their draft in a lottery-based system. So rather than just having the worst team in the league get the #1 pick, the second worst team in the league get the #2 pick, and so on, where you finish in the standings for the teams who didn't make the playoffs, you get certain odds or a percentage of chance of landing a top 4 pick, regardless if you finished with the worst record in the league or the 14th worst record in the league, since only 14 lottery teams have a shot to win the draft lottery. Now, I made a video on this a while back, and it was why tanking in the NBA is never a good strategy. I'll leave a link to it in the description in case you were newer to the channel, and I think I uploaded around February or so. And my argument at that time was based on the fact that the Bulls essentially tanked for 3 straight seasons after trading Jimmy Butler. And despite tanking, for quality franchise-changing players, guys like Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, the Bulls got unlucky in the draft lottery and ended up with Wendell Carter Jr. and Coby White. And that's nothing to take away from those guys, but they're nothing compared to Doncic and Zion and what they've already shown in their short time in the league. So the point being is nothing is guaranteed in the NBA draft. You might think that you're going to get a #1 pick and end up getting a #5 pick or even worse. And on top of that, you also don't know what type of player you're going to get, even if you do get a high draft pick. You have guys like Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins, Jahlil Okafor, Markelle Fultz, Josh Jackson, all players recently who were drafted that were thought to be future star players. And then you can compare them to guys who went much later and ended up becoming superstars, say guys like Giannis, Nikola Jokic, Kawhi Leonard. None of these guys went in the top 10. It is incredibly hard to assess talent and how it will translate into the NBA going from college. So with all of that in mind, the question I keep hearing from so many folks in the comments is, should we tank? And sometimes it's not even a question, it's more of a factual statement that people are making. Well, obviously the Bulls should tank now, why wouldn't they? They're not going to make it to the playoffs, let's lose as many games as possible and just cross our fingers and hope that we get that #4 pick. Well, there's a few problems with that. One, I'm not quite sure people fully understand just how low the odds are for the Bulls based on how many games they have won so far compared to the rest of the tanking teams. Now, I showed this graphic a while back when explaining how the top 4 pick protection would work for the Bulls, as there was some confusion as to how exactly that would work, but this is actually updated every day based on the changing standings. So this is a current, at least current at the time of this recording, of where folks currently stand. Now, the Bulls are currently sitting with the 10th worst record in the league, which, yeah, I know it pains me to say it, but it's true. So if the season were to end right now and the draft lottery were happening today, the Bulls would have a 3% chance of getting the #1 pick, a 3.3% chance of the #2, 3.6% chance of #3, and a 4% chance at the #4 pick. There would be no opportunity to fall between picks 5 through 9 because, again, the draft lottery is for the top 4 picks, so they would have a 65.9% chance of the 10th pick, which again would go to Orlando, and the only way they would fall lower than 10 is if one of those teams that were below the Bulls right now got lucky and jumped into the top 4. But none of that matters anyway because that pick would go to the Magic. So let's say that the Bulls continue to lose games, which I know is what we all expect given the recent performance of the team and the fact that Lavine is going to be out of the lineup for some time now. It sounds like it'll be at least 10 to 14 days, likely meaning he's out for the rest of the month. So if you look at the remaining standings, the Bulls are a half a game ahead of the Kings. They're a full game ahead of the Raptors, which, mind you, I'm recording this on Thursday evening, so it's possible some of this has been adjusted a bit. They're also a game ahead of the Wizards, 2.5 games ahead of the Cavs and the Thunder, but the rest is where it really falls off. You have the Magic, where the Bulls are 4.5 games ahead of, 6.5 games ahead of the Pistons, 8.5 games ahead of the Rockets, and 9 full games ahead of the Timberwolves. Mind you, the majority of teams throughout the league have less than 20 games left to play in the season. The Kings are on a massive losing streak right now, same with the Thunder, and you also have the bottom 3 teams all on losing streaks as well. So it's not like the Bulls are just easily going to be able to make their way to the bottom even if they do continue losing, because the bottom teams are also going to continue losing because they're bad teams, and unlike the Bulls, they have their picks, so they have an incentive to continue losing. I would say best case scenario, and it seems weird to be saying that it's a best case scenario because I would much rather have the Bulls go in the other direction, but is where they fall behind in the standings below where the Wizards are currently at. So that would mean that they would have a 7.5% chance to an 8.5% chance of landing between picks number 1 and number 4, most likely getting the number 8 pick, which would go to the Magic. Let's even, for argument's sake, say the Bulls fall all the way down to where the Thunder are, because they're not falling below those bottom 4 teams. There's just too much of a gap between them. Even if the Bulls lose the majority of their final games, you know, those 2 teams are going to be losing the majority of their games as well. But let's say that they fall that low. Even then, the Bulls would have around a 10.5% chance of landing in the top 4. Better odds, but still not that great. You're most likely going to fall in the 6 to 7 range, which again would go to the Magic. So for all of you guys who are saying the Bulls would be best to just tank this season now, like, I get where you're coming from, because if the playoffs are likely out anyway, why still keep trying to win games? Just lose as much as possible for lottery odds, which in theory sounds great, but with these odds, I mean, where you want to be is that bottom 3 in the league. You look at those bottom 3 teams and their chances, they all have the same odds for the top 4 picks. But as you can see, even the worst team in the league is not even guaranteed a top 4 pick. They could still fall to the number 5 pick. Now, odds aside, because that's one reason not to tank, especially if you're the Bulls, because it's not like you can lose a few extra more games to, say, go from number 10 to number 7. Because I won't, you know, it won't matter. The only way it matters is if the Bulls are able to land a top 4 pick. But all of that aside, the odds not being great for the Bulls, given they've already won too many games compared to some of the other teams that you see here, is reinforcing the culture of perpetual losing. Honestly, I feel part of the reason some of these guys don't show enough heart and energy and effort on the court is because they've developed this mindset of losing over these past few seasons, because that's essentially what the Bulls were trying to do, build through the draft. So by tanking, not only are the odds not great for the Bulls to actually land in the top 4, but you reinforce this losing mindset for the players. You're not going to be able to attract free agents, although you could argue based on the way the Bulls have been playing, that likely wasn't going to be the case anyway. And on top of all of that, I mean, it's likely Zach Lavine is going to get disgruntled, disinterested, and may even request a trade in the offseason, unless of course Arturas makes big moves in the offseason to convince him to stay, which let's hope that he does that. So no, I don't think tanking for the rest of the season makes any and all sense for the Bulls. If they hadn't traded away their pick, then sure. But a worst case scenario is the Bulls tank, quote unquote, the rest of the season. Players buy into this idea of losing rather than creating a winning mentality in the group. The Bulls lose more, they fall in the standings further, and they don't get lucky in the lottery and end up giving the pick to the Magic anyway. And need I remind you, the Bulls currently are still 10th in the East, which is good enough for the play-in tournament. I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather see these guys fight tooth and nail, build chemistry while Lavine is out. Zach comes back fresh and rested to close out the season. The Bulls come out strong in the play-in tournament with the 10th seed and end up making their way into the playoffs, making their pick a mid-first rounder to send to the Magic, making the Vucevic trade an even better value for the lower pick that they ended up having to give away for him. That would be ideal. I know it's wishful thinking, because even how can we even conceive that right now based on what we've seen from the Bulls recently? But hey, we can dream, can't we? Let me know what you guys think though, based on where we're at. Are you pro tanking or still against it despite the circumstances of Zach being out? Let me know in the comments. I'll also likely leave a community poll question on this as well, so be on the lookout for that. Be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.